Commander Han Suho stood at the window of his office on Space Station Omega-7, looking at the stars. His reflection showed a man in his 50s wearing a crisp blue uniform with gold stripes on the shoulders. He watched as transport ships came and went from the busy space station. The year was 2185, and humanity had spread across several star systems. Space Station Omega-7 was one of the biggest stations, home to over 100,000 people from Earth and other planets. It was also an important trading point between humans and alien species. Han's office comm system beeped. "Commander, Officer Kim Jin-woo is here as requested," his assistant said. "Send him in," Han ordered, not turning from the window. The office door slid open with a soft hiss. Officer Kim walked in, his boots making soft sounds on the polished floor. He was young, maybe 25, and looked nervous. "Sir, you wanted to see me?" Kim asked, standing at attention. Han finally turned around. His face was stern, and his eyes were cold. "Officer Kim, explain to me why you let Detective Williams take charge of the Centaurian embassy case." Kim swallowed hard. "Sir, Detective Williams has the most experience with diplomatic cases. She worked on 3 similar situations last year, and—" "I don't care about her experience," Han cut him off. "You were the assigned lead officer. You should have handled it yourself." "But sir, Detective Williams solved the case in just 2 days. The Centaurian ambassador was very pleased with." Han slammed his hand on his desk. Several digital tablets jumped at the impact. "That's not the point. You're showing weakness by letting her take control. How do you expect to advance in this department if you can't handle cases on your own?" Kim stood straighter, his face showing confusion. "Sir, I thought the goal was to solve cases efficiently. Detective Williams has an excellent record. And her record doesn't matter," Han said, his voice getting quieter but more dangerous. "What matters is the proper chain of command. This precinct has traditions, Officer Kim. We have a certain way of doing things. Your family has served in law enforcement for 3 generations. You should understand this." Kim's confusion grew. "Sir, are you saying I shouldn't work with Detective Williams because she's—" "I'm saying," Han interrupted again, "that you need to maintain proper authority. This precinct has standards. We can't have just anyone taking charge of sensitive cases." Through the office window behind Han, the stars continued to shine. A large passenger ship was departing, its engines glowing blue against the black of space. Inside the office, the air felt thick with tension. "From now on," Han continued, "you will handle your assigned cases personally. If you need assistance, you will consult with Senior Officer Park or Lieutenant Lee. Is that clear?" "But sir, that's not what the department regulations." "Is that clear?" Han's words came out like ice. Kim's shoulders slumped slightly. "Yes, sir." Dismissed. As Kim turned to leave, Han spoke again. "And Officer Kim, your father would be disappointed to see you questioning our traditions." The young officer's back stiffened, but he didn't respond. He walked out of the office, the door sliding shut behind him. Han returned to the window, watching his reflection again. He didn't notice the small device hidden in the office plant near his desk, its tiny red light blinking as it recorded everything. In another part of the station, Detective Maya Williams sat at her desk, reviewing case files. She was in her 30s, with her hair in neat braids and wearing a well-pressed detective's uniform. Her desk was organized, with multiple screens showing different reports and data. Her comm unit buzzed quietly. The message was encoded, meant only for her eyes. "Recording received. Evidence file updated. Maintain cover. Director P." Maya allowed herself a small smile before returning to her work. On her screen was the Centaurian embassy case file, the one that had made Commander Han so angry. She had solved it quickly, yes, but that wasn't the only reason she had taken the case. Every action was part of a larger plan. Meanwhile, Officer Kim walked through the station's corridors, his mind troubled. He passed other officers, Some human, some alien, nodding to them automatically. He thought about his father, about tradition, about right and wrong. The station's artificial day cycle was moving toward evening, making the corridors dimmer. He reached his small office and sat down heavily in his chair. On his desk was the commendation he'd received last week for the Centaurian case, the one Detective Williams had helped solve. Next to it was a photo of his father in his own police uniform from 20 years ago. Kim picked up the photo, looking at it closely. "What would you really think, Father?" he whispered. "About tradition, about change." The stars outside the station kept shining, indifferent to the small dramas playing out inside. But things were starting to move. Small pieces were falling into place. Commander Han didn't know it yet, but his carefully maintained world of tradition and prejudice was beginning to crack. In her office, Maya Williams received another encoded message. Phase 1 complete. Moving to Phase 2. Meeting tomorrow at 800. Director P. She sent back a simple acknowledgement, then shut down her workstation for the day. As she walked through the station's corridors toward her quarters, she passed Commander Han's office. Through the window, she could see him still standing there, looking out at the stars, probably feeling very sure of his position and power. Maya allowed herself another small smile. Let him feel secure for now. Changes were coming to Space Station Omega 7, whether Commander Han was ready for them or not. That night, as the station's day cycle dimmed to simulate evening, 3 separate reports were secretly transmitted to the Internal Affairs headquarters. One contained Commander Han's conversation with Officer Kim. Another held statistics about case assignments and promotions in Han's precinct over the past 5 years. The third was encrypted so heavily that only 2 people on the entire station could read it. The pieces were in place. The real work was about to begin. Director Park Mayray's office was located in a quiet section of Space Station Omega 7. Unlike the busy police precinct, this area was peaceful. The walls were soundproofed, and the windows were tinted to prevent anyone from seeing inside. Maya Williams sat across from Director Park, watching as her superior reviewed the latest evidence on a large screen. The room was bright but comfortable, with simple furniture and several plants that helped clean the station's air. Commander Han was not careful this time. Director Park said, her voice calm but pleased. She was in her mid-40s, wearing a simple black uniform with silver bands on the sleeves. His conversation with Officer Kim gives us exactly what we need. Maya nodded. He's getting more obvious with his discrimination. He thinks no one can touch him. Director Park played the recording again. Han's voice filled the room. This precinct has traditions, Officer Kim. We have a certain way of doing things. Classic coded language, Maya said, making notes on her tablet. He never directly mentions race, but his meaning is clear, especially when we compare it with the promotion data. Director Park brought up a new screen. It showed charts and numbers from the past 5 years. Look at these patterns. The numbers told a clear story. Earth-born humans of color were consistently passed over for promotions, given lower performance ratings, and assigned to less important cases. Meanwhile, officers of Asian descent were promoted faster, even when they had less experience. What about Officer Kim? Maya asked. He seems uncomfortable with Han's methods. Director Park nodded. We've been watching him. He could be a valuable ally. His father was different from what Han suggests. He actually fought against discrimination in his time. Maya looked surprised. Han is using his father's memory to manipulate him. Yes, we found his father's old records. He was part of a movement to make the space police force more inclusive. Han is twisting that history. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent message. Another recording had arrived from one of their hidden devices. They played it immediately. The recording showed Han in a private meeting with Lieutenant Lee Tai-young. They were discussing upcoming promotions. We need to maintain the right balance in the senior positions, Han was saying. We can't risk changing too much too fast. The wrong promotions could damage the precinct's stability. But sir, Lee's voice was hesitant. Detective Williams' record is exceptional. The promotion board will ask questions if we pass her over again. Let me worry about the board, Han replied. Just make sure your recommendations follow our guidelines. Everyone has their proper place in the hierarchy. Director Park stopped the recording. Lieutenant Lee is another possible ally. He follows Han's orders, but he's clearly uncomfortable with them. Maya stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. We're getting close. How much more evidence do we need? Not much. Director Park pulled up another screen. But we need to be careful. Han has friends in high places. When we move, we need to be sure we can take down his entire network. Just then, Maya's comm unit buzzed. It was a message from Officer Kim, marked urgent. Need to talk. It's about Commander Han. Somewhere private. Maya showed the message to Director Park, who smiled. Perfect timing. Use meeting room C. We have it secured. This could be the break we need. 20 minutes later, Maya sat in the small meeting room, waiting. The room was plain, with just a table and 4 chairs. A small plant in the corner held another recording device. Officer Kim entered, looking nervous but determined. He carried an old data chip in his hand. Detective Williams, he said, sitting down. I found something you should see. What is it? Maya asked, keeping her voice professional. My father's personal logs. Kim placed the data chip on the table. I started reading them after what Commander Han said. My father, he wasn't what Han claimed. He fought against the same things Han is doing now. Maya kept her expression neutral, even though this was exactly what they'd hoped for. That must have been a difficult discovery. Kim's voice grew stronger. My father wrote about officers like Han. He called them tradition keepers, people who use the past as an excuse to maintain inequality. I can't be part of that. What are you saying, Officer Kim? I want to help. He looked directly at her. Whatever you're investigating, and I know you are investigating something, I want to help. For my father's real legacy. Maya studied him for a moment, then made a decision. She pressed a button on her comm unit. Director Park, could you join us, please? Minutes later, Director Park entered the room. Kim's eyes widened as he recognized one of the highest-ranking internal affairs officials on the station. Officer Kim. Director Park said warmly, we've been hoping you'd join us. Over the next hour, they explained the investigation to Kim. They showed him the evidence they'd gathered, the patterns they'd uncovered. Kim added his own experiences, filling in details they hadn't known. Han's network is bigger than you think, Kim told them. He has connections with recruiters who make sure only certain candidates get interviews. There's a whole system. Director Park took careful notes. This is exactly what we needed, but now we have to move carefully. Han will be watching for any signs of investigation. What do you need me to do? Kim asked. Keep doing your job, Maya said. But now you'll be our eyes and ears. Report anything suspicious, but don't take risks. Han is dangerous when he feels threatened. As they finished the meeting, Maya received another urgent message. One of their surveillance devices had caught Han making calls to his network. He was planning something big. He's trying to push through a new promotion list. Maya read from the message. All his preferred candidates. He wants it done before the end of the month. Director Park's expression hardened. Then we have 2 weeks to finish gathering evidence. After that, we move. They spent the rest of the day planning their next steps. Kim returned to his duties with new purpose, carrying hidden recording devices. Maya continued her regular detective work while secretly monitoring Han's communications. That evening, as the station's day cycle dimmed, Maya sat in her quarters reviewing the new evidence. Her comm unit buzzed with a message from Director Park. Phase 2 accelerated. Han is moving faster than expected. Be ready. Maya sent back a simple acknowledgement, then looked out her window at the stars. Soon, very soon, everything would change on Space Station Omega 7. Commander Han's carefully built world of discrimination and privilege was about to come crashing down. The question was, how many others would fall with him? The main meeting room of Space Station Omega-7's police precinct was full. Commander Han Suho stood at the front, looking pleased with himself. Behind him, a large screen showed promotion statistics and performance reviews. All officers had been required to attend this monthly review meeting. Maya Williams sat in the middle row, appearing to take notes on her tablet. In reality, she was monitoring multiple recording devices placed throughout the room. Today was the day everything would change. Our precinct continues to maintain the highest standards of excellence, Han was saying, his voice proud. Through careful attention to our traditions and proper procedures, we have kept order and stability. In the back of the room, Officer Kim Jin-woo watched silently. He wore a new recording device hidden in his uniform badge, provided by Internal Affairs. His hands were steady, but his heart was beating fast. Lieutenant Lee Tae-young stood near the door, his face carefully neutral. He had been avoiding eye contact with everyone since the meeting began. Now, Han continued, I want to address some concerns that have been raised about our promotion practices. Some people think we need to change our traditional methods. He paused, looking directly at Maya. Some people don't understand the importance of maintaining proper order. Maya kept her face calm, though she knew what was coming. She had seen Han's planned speech in advance, thanks to their surveillance. The fact is, Han said, his voice growing stronger, not everyone is suited for leadership positions. Some people lack the necessary cultural understanding. Some people would disrupt our carefully maintained harmony. The room was silent. Many officers looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. This was how Han had maintained control for so long, through silence and fear. Therefore, Han announced, I am implementing new guidelines for promotions and case assignments. These will ensure that our traditions are properly respected. He pressed a button, and new charts appeared on the screen. They showed even stricter requirements for promotions, requirements that would make it nearly impossible for officers of color to advance. Maya glanced at Director Park, who sat near the back of the room. The director gave a tiny nod. It was time. Maya stood up. Commander Han, she said clearly, I have some questions about these new guidelines. Han's face showed annoyance. Detective Williams, this is not the time for... Actually, Maya interrupted, her voice strong and clear. This is exactly the time. She pressed a button on her tablet. The screen behind Han suddenly changed, showing different statistics, the real numbers they had gathered. What is this? Han demanded, trying to change the screen back. This is the truth, Commander. Maya walked to the front of the room. These numbers show a clear pattern of discrimination in promotions, case assignments, and performance reviews. Han's face turned red. You are out of line, Detective. Security, remove her from. She's not out of line, Commander Han, a new voice said. Director Park stood up, her Internal Affairs badge clearly visible. In fact, she's doing her job as Deputy Director of Internal Affairs Special Investigations Unit. The room erupted in whispers. Han's face went from red to white. What is this nonsense? She's just a detective. She doesn't have the qualifications. Actually, Maya said calmly, I have been with Internal Affairs for 8 years. My qualifications exceed yours in every category. She put her own Internal Affairs badge on the podium. We've been investigating you for months. More screens activated around the room, showing recordings of Han's private meetings, his discriminatory orders, his secret communications with his network. This is some kind of trick, Han said, but his voice was weak. You can't. Commander Han Suho, Director Park said formally, walking to the front. You are hereby relieved of duty pending a full investigation into discrimination, abuse of power, and corruption. Security officers entered the room, not Han's usual team, but Internal Affairs agents who had been waiting outside. Han looked around wildly, seeing his world crumble. You don't understand. He tried one last time. Our traditions are not an excuse for discrimination, Maya finished firmly. The law is clear. Every officer, regardless of their background, deserves fair treatment and equal opportunities. Lieutenant Lee stepped forward. Commander Han, I have my own evidence to add. He pulled out a data chip. I've been keeping records of your illegal orders for the past year. Han stared at Lee in shock. You? But you always followed. I followed because I was afraid, Lee admitted, but not anymore. He handed the chip to Director Park. Officer Kim spoke up next. I have evidence too. My father's records show that Han has been twisting our real traditions. The Space Force was meant to be inclusive, not exclusive. One by one, other officers stood up, offering their own stories and evidence. The dam of silence had broken. Maya watched as internal affairs agents led Han away. His face was a mask of disbelief. He had been so sure of his power, so convinced of his right to discriminate, that he couldn't understand how it had all fallen apart. Director Park addressed the room. This precinct will undergo a complete review. All promotions and assignments will be reevaluated based on merit alone. Any officer who has faced discrimination can file a report with Internal Affairs. After the meeting, Maya stood by the window, looking out at the stars. Officer Kim joined her. I still can't believe you were Internal Affairs all along, he said. Maya smiled. Sometimes the best way to expose discrimination is to experience it firsthand. Thank you for your help. What happens now? Kim asked. Now, Director Park said, joining them, we start rebuilding this precinct the right way. There will be changes, fair changes. She looked at Maya, and I believe we found exactly the right person to help lead those changes. The stars outside seemed brighter somehow. On Space Station Omega-7, a new day was beginning, one where every officer would have a fair chance to serve and succeed, regardless of their background. Han's traditions were over. Real justice was taking their place. 1 week after Commander Han's arrest, Space Station Omega-7's police precinct was very different. The hallways were busier than ever as internal affairs teams reviewed years of records. Officers spoke more freely now, sharing stories they had kept quiet for years. Maya Williams sat in her new office, the one that used to belong to Han. She had removed his dark furniture and replaced it with simpler pieces. The windows were no longer tinted, letting in the light of passing ships and distant stars. A knock on her door interrupted her work. Come in, she called. Officer Kim Jin-woo entered, carrying several data tablets. Deputy Director Williams, I have the first batch of promotion reviews you requested. Maya smiled at the young officer. Thank you, Kim. And please, it's still just Maya when we're not in formal meetings. Kim placed the tablets on her desk. These cases are the most obvious ones. 28 officers were passed over for promotion despite excellent records. Maya picked up the first tablet. Officer Petal from Security Division. Perfect record. 3 commendations, but never promoted past junior grade. Exactly the kind of case we need to fix. There's more, Kim said. Lieutenant Lee provided access to Han's private communications. We found connections to other precincts on different space stations. This wasn't just happening here. Maya nodded seriously. Director Park is already coordinating with internal affairs divisions across the solar system. Han's network was bigger than we thought. Their discussion was interrupted by another knock. Director Park entered, looking tired but satisfied. The news is spreading, she said. We're getting messages from officers on other stations, coming forward with similar stories. Maya gestured for them both to sit. How are Han's supporters responding? As expected, Director Park replied. They're claiming we're destroying tradition and undermining authority. But their arguments aren't working anymore. Too many people are speaking up now. Kim brought up another file on his tablet. We're also getting interesting messages from the Centaurian embassy. Apparently, they had noticed Han's discrimination against their diplomats too. They're offering to help with the investigation. Maya stood and walked to the window, thinking. Outside, A large passenger ship was docking, its lights bright against the darkness of space. "We need to make sure these changes last," she said. "It's not enough to just remove Han and his supporters." Director Park nodded. "That's why we're implementing the new training programs. Every officer will learn about the real history of the Space Force, including the parts Han tried to hide." "Like my father's work," Kim added quietly. He had spent the past week reading through his father's complete records. He believed the Space Force could unite people from all backgrounds. That was the real tradition Han corrupted. Maya turned back to them. "We should share those records. Let everyone see what our service was meant to be." Just then, Maya's computer chimed with an urgent message. Her eyes widened as she read it. They found something in Han's personal files. Records of bribes paid to academy instructors to fail certain candidates. Director Park moved quickly to read the message. "This goes back 15 years. He was blocking qualified candidates before they could even join the force. And look at these names," Kim said, pointing at the screen. "Some of these candidates went on to join police forces on Earth instead. They're serving with distinction there." "Contact them," Maya decided. "Offer them a chance to transfer here if they want. It's time to make things right." As they worked, more officers began dropping by Maya's office. Some brought evidence they had been afraid to share before. Others came with questions about the new promotion system. Each conversation showed how much the precinct was changing. Later that day, Maya attended a meeting with the station's civilian council. The large meeting room was packed with representatives from different parts of the station's community. "The changes in the police precinct are just the beginning," Maya explained to the council. "We need to examine all our institutions. Discrimination doesn't stay confined to one department." An elderly council member stood up. "Some people are worried about too much change too quickly. They say we need stability." Maya met his eyes calmly. "With respect, stability built on discrimination isn't really stable at all. It's a foundation that will always crack. We need to build something better." The council meeting lasted for hours. Maya presented evidence, answered questions, and outlined plans for the future. By the end, even the skeptical members were nodding in agreement. That evening, as the station's day cycle dimmed, Maya met with Director Park one last time. The investigative team found something else in Han's files, Director Park said. A list of officers on other stations who shared his views. Officers in positions of power. Maya took the data chip containing the list. "Then our work isn't finished." "No," Director Park agreed. "But now we know what to look for, and we have proof that change is possible." They looked out at the stars together. Somewhere out there, other officers like Han were still abusing their power. But now, their time was running out. On Maya's desk, her computer chimed again. More messages from other stations, more officers coming forward with evidence. The wave of change was spreading across space. "Han thought he was protecting tradition," Maya said quietly. "He never understood that the best traditions are the ones that help us grow, that bring people together instead of keeping them apart." Director Park smiled. "Then let's make sure everyone understands that now." As night fell on Space Station Omega-7, lights began coming on in windows across its curved surface. In the police precinct, officers of all backgrounds worked together, sharing stories and plans for the future. The stars watched silently as the station continued its endless orbit, its small community learning how to become something better than it had been before. The real work was just beginning. 3 months after Commander Han's arrest, Space Station Omega-7's main conference center was filled to capacity. Representatives from every space station in the solar system had gathered for a special ceremony. The large windows showed Earth floating in the distance, a beautiful blue sphere against the black of space. Maya Williams stood at the podium, wearing her formal internal affairs uniform with its new director's insignia. Director Park Mirai sat in the front row, smiling proudly at her former deputy and successor. Next to her sat Officer Kim Jin-woo, recently promoted to detective. "Today marks a new chapter in law enforcement history," Maya began, her voice clear and strong. 3 months ago, We exposed a system of discrimination that had taken root in our police force. But today, we're not here to dwell on past wrongs. We're here to ensure a better future. The screens behind her showed statistics from the past 3 months. Promotion rates had balanced across all backgrounds, case closure rates had improved, and officer satisfaction scores were at an all-time high. These improvements came not just from removing discriminatory leaders, Maya continued, but from embracing the true spirit of our service. Every officer, regardless of their background, now has an equal chance to serve and excel. In the audience, Lieutenant Lee Tai-young, now Acting Commander Lee, nodded in agreement. His testimony against Han had helped convict the former commander, who was now serving time in Earth's maximum security prison. Maya pressed a button on the podium, changing the display. We're implementing these new policies across all space stations. The changes we've seen here on Omega 7 are just the beginning. She gestured to a group of new officers sitting together. They were the candidates who had been unfairly failed at the academy years ago, now finally wearing the uniforms they had earned. Their faces showed pride and determination. But policies alone aren't enough, Maya said. We need to change how we think about tradition and progress. True tradition isn't about keeping things the same. It's about holding on to what's best from our past while building a better future. Director Park stood and joined Maya at the podium. Together, they unveiled the new standard of service, a document that would guide law enforcement across all space stations. This standard is built on 4 principles, Director Park explained: merit-based advancement, equal opportunity, cultural understanding, and continuous improvement. These aren't just words on paper. They're commitments we must live by. The ceremony continued with stories from officers who had faced discrimination under the old system. Each story showed how much had changed and how much work still lay ahead. Detective Kim shared his father's records with everyone, showing how the early Space Force had been built on principles of inclusion and unity. These were our real traditions, he said. It's time we return to them. After the main ceremony, Maya met with representatives from other stations. Many had already started their own investigations, finding and removing officers who shared Han's prejudices. The Centaurian Embassy is particularly pleased, one representative reported. They're increasing cooperation with all our stations now that they trust our commitment to fairness. Later that evening, Maya stood in her office. No longer Han's old office, but truly hers now. The stars outside seemed brighter somehow. A small ship passed by, its engines glowing softly in the darkness. Director Park joined her. You've done remarkable work, Director Williams. Maya turned to her mentor and friend. We all did this together, but there's still so much to do. Yes, Park agreed, but now we have a foundation to build on. And more importantly, we have hope. Their conversation was interrupted by Detective Kim arriving with urgent news. The first graduating class from the Reformed Academy is ready for assignment, he announced proudly. Every candidate was evaluated fairly, just as it should have been all along. Maya reviewed the list of graduates on her tablet. The names represented every human background, and several alien species as well. Each one had earned their place through merit alone. Assign them across all departments, Maya decided. Let's show everyone what a truly fair system looks like. As the station's day cycle moved toward evening, officers gathered in the precinct's common area. The space that had once been divided by unspoken boundaries now hosted officers of all backgrounds sharing stories and experiences. Maya watched from the doorway as Detective Kim led a briefing for a new investigation team. The team included both veteran officers and new graduates, humans, and aliens, all working together as equals. Director Park joined her one last time. Ready for tomorrow? Maya nodded. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more work to be done. But now they had proof that change was possible, that justice could prevail. Han thought he was protecting something, Maya said quietly, but he was really just standing in the way of progress. The real strength of any organization comes from including everyone, from giving everyone a fair chance to contribute. Outside the station windows, Earth continued its eternal dance around the sun. Ships came and went, carrying people and goods between the planets, and on Space Station Omega-7, a new tradition was taking root, one of fairness, opportunity, and real justice. The stars watched silently as Maya returned to her work. There would always be more to do, more barriers to break down, more minds to change. But now they had shown everyone that change was possible. They had proven that justice could win. And that was just the beginning.